everyone, welcome to Zannen, Canada. I'm your host, Jesse Betteridge. This is, of course, a podcast dealing with the connections between anime and Canadian media, and joining me once again on the program is Karl Olsen. Karl, welcome back, and also welcome to 2021. How are you enjoying it so far?
It's better than 2020 in some ways, at least, I suppose. The Bernie at the inauguration meme, you know, give it that.
That's been a highlight so far for sure. I think we're still dealing with most of the crap from 2020. But...
Yeah, so if you take a look at we still are dealing with everything that 2020 has, but so far there's been some fun things along the way.
We've
lived through history, literal history.
This episode is not going to really focus on anything in particular. We're just going to do kind of a news roundup, talk about a few different things. And a lot of that is because I was just afraid to plan any specific subject for this episode because I had no idea what the world was going to look like.
Also,
by the time
in
we
our
recorded.
specific pocket that this podcast handles, some of the things that I imagine we're talking about this episode could change.
Yeah.
As always.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Because things are just that wild right now.
We
sure do live in interesting times.
On that note, normally the first episode I do every year, I have Randy on and we talk about the previous year in movies, which is a little difficult this time around. Not to say that there weren't movies,
baby.
It's not to say that there weren't movies. I am proud to say that the last movie that I saw in 2020 was actually not Sonic the Hedgehog. It was Ride Your Wave, which was fantastic.
That's definitely classier.
Yeah.
I saw no movies in 2020.
Did you manage to see Ride Your Wave?
I didn't get to see it in theaters. No,
Yeah.
When did that run in theaters?
That was February. So it's like
and
right at the end of
definitely
the end of civilization, basically.
Yeah. Was that before or after the con here in Victoria? Was that before or after Tsukino Con?
I think it was like either the week before or the week after. I can't. It was the week. It was right before. So then I headed over your way and we went to Tsukino Con, which is a lot of fun.
I think that was one of the last weeks I went in to work physically.
Yeah.
And it was like, boss is coming back from Austin and they said they had COVID there. Let's just all stay home. And then we just continued to do that.
Glad we could make it to that last con. And
we went to one of the last cons in North America for
last credible cons in North America.
Last credible. Yeah, because I think about that and I'm like, oh yeah, there were COVID cons. There were Rona cons in Texas. Because, they do it like that.
Yeah, and who knows
where flip it to everybody. I know there's like hundreds of thousands of people dead, but it's gallows humor.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's what else are you gonna say right now, right?
Mm-hmm.
But for movies, that so I am gonna say, I mean, people are probably gonna disagree with me on this. I do personally think, just based on what I've observed over the last year, that movie theaters are not really a super dangerous thing. For COVID, I think if they follow protocols properly, you can, a movie theater is not a bad place to go, and I think you can.
I think the tough part is it's hard to have them active enough to make money in them, and you still have to do retrofits, and still, if things really light off, you just have a certain level of density, and you can't get around it. Like the problem is it's just like if movie theaters in a vacuum, if that was the only thing, it'd be like. That's all that's open are movie theaters and grocery stores.
Yeah.
Could maybe get away with it. But the problem is the second you throw and you can go have a socially distanced beer, you're like, well, we're done.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the Rio Theater in Vancouver recently reopened as a sports bar, and people were joking that they should just reopen as a popcorn theater that just happened to have a very large television screen, which is not far off from what they're doing right now.
That's literally what they're doing is they're saying is like, well, we've got the digital projectors anyways, and if instead of having a movie in there, we have the hockey game, whatever one happens to be going on, and we lean into that whole we did get a liquor license thing, and we tape off all these rows, we can be open-ish enough that we don't just have to straight GoFundMe beg to continue to exist.
Yeah. Point is, I think as long as theaters are at least following protocol or show that they can follow a specific protocol, and aren't, packing screenings, I think it's okay. Nonetheless, Evangelion 3.0 plus 1.0, who knows when we're going to see that?
We're like
Anywhere.
it's rumored we're not even going to have the Olympics now there, so it's like it's all up in the air. Which is funny because I swear some of the stuff we got this season was totally because they're like, hey, that event was in the Olympics just months ago. This is the perfect time to launch a blank anime.
Well, as I mentioned in the last episode, like Extra Olympia Kaiklos, like the entire point of that entire show was to tie in with the Olympics, and not only did the Olympics get canceled, the show itself got postponed across the year, and it had like a prime time slot. It wasn't a late night show, so
which is weird because it's got the most late night show.
It's basically an Adult Swim show.
It is so Adult Swim in its fives.
I think we did get 100%, pretty much, or if not 100%, very close to all the movies that came out, in the States or other countries. Of course, not in BC because theaters are closed here. We actually did not get that third Heaven's Feel Fate Stay Night film, which I hope is going to get a re-release at some point. Because
I feel like there's a lot of people who are like, there's some fast money to make once the stuff winds down. Fingers crossed. So I think there's a lot. I think there's a lot in the pipeline for literally everything, all at once for any type of activity.
Yeah.
But certainly media stuff for sure.
Yeah. We'll see. I'm hoping I can go back to a movie theater again. Despite the fact that I think it's not entirely dangerous to do so, I still have not been to a movie theater since last February. And I'd really like to get back to doing that again. Lupin the First is one movie that did open here. I don't suppose you VOD'd that one yet?
No, I mean, I should, but it's one of those things where I know it's going to get a nice release. It's just kind of like, I'll wait. Like, I know that's not going to disappoint me to own from the jump. So it's just kind of like, and I don't know.
It's G Kids, so they'll have it at Sunrise Records.
Yeah, it'll be easy to get. Yeah. I mean, even if it was not like, I mean, if it was hard, it would probably mean it was like, a discotheque release instead. And I'd be like, oh no, our wonderful friends from the internet have made yet another lovely Lupin release. What a shame.
Yeah. Just jumping into something else. Karl, did you remember to vote in the Crunchyroll Anime Awards?
Oh, I did. I very much did.
Did you vote every day for your favorite choices?
Lord, no. I just voted once heavily for Isaachead in most categories because it was like the best anime last year. Just
indeed, it was.
It ain't even a question.
I see. With the Crunchyroll Anime Awards, I find that the nominations carry significantly more weight than the titles that wind up winning the actual awards in the end. Because if you're not familiar with how the Crunchyroll Anime Awards work, they come up with categories and the nominations. The nominations are picked by actual people with actual credentials, people who know what they're doing, people like they're a curated selection of judges.
You don't have to even go into it so deeply. It's people with taste. It's classy people with good anime taste.
Yeah.
Who will have and who better still don't just only enjoy anime. They have a very varied and complete media diet.
Exactly.
So they understand what good is. And then they let regular people vote.
Well, not even just that. The expectation is that you have the ability to vote every day. So even if you are trying to legitimately help something win, you have to vote all 7 days that this thing is running for all these different categories. And also that one other problem I have with it is that they make up categories on a year-by-year basis. Sometimes categories are just made up for a specific title a lot of the time, which that's not a great way of doing things.
It's got big MTV Music Video Awards vibes.
But even then, it would even be something else if the awards just allowed everyone just to vote once, and you have to have a Crunchyroll account to do it. I think that would be a more reasonable way of doing things. But for whatever reason, they don't do it that way. So as a result, usually the winners are the most popular title regardless of the category, because people just vote for their favorite show.
Obsessively.
In every category, regardless of whether it even deserves to have that nomination to begin with. I'm expecting that Jujutsu Kaisen is probably going to win in like almost every category it's nominated for, whether or not it is deserving of it. I did want to highlight, though, you may remember last year I had Genice Chan on the show. She is, of course, the illustrator and animator from Vancouver. She works for Giant Ant. And she directed the ending theme for BNA, Brand New Animal. She also did the concept art and contributed to the character designs on that show. I just wanted to highlight she was nominated for both of those things.
And out of respect for Canadian content, I made sure to vote for her on those categories.
I did as well, for sure. Unfortunately, I don't think BNA has a chance of winning the ending theme category.
Man, BNA is like up against just incredible competition.
Yeah.
Like even if you factored everything else out, it's all like, yeah, but like literally Freddie Mercury got an end theme this year.
And you know what?
It's a good credit sequence too. It's not bad.
It's fantastic. Great pretender. I think it's incredible. I don't think even that's going to win. I think it's going to be the Jujutsu Kaisen ending theme, which like honestly is fantastic, but still.
You're really going to put it over yeah, it's one of those things where it's like objectively though, if you're not like a stand for stuff and you just enjoy the medium, you'd be like, that's not the best.
Yeah. All right. So I just wanted to bring attention to that. The voting period is over, so I can't encourage you to vote for her, but it's still really awesome. I wanted to congratulate her for those nominations. For the reasons I said before, I think the nominations themselves are like the best takeaway you can get from the awards itself.
It certainly means that the industry people and the press people who actually do the very careful and thought out picking for this stuff recognized it for what it is, which is like it is a fun, like the BNA designs there and the animation, the whole set really comes together well, and it doesn't feel out of place either. It's entirely in line with the whole Trigger vibe, which is not an easy thing to catch.
Yeah.
And yet does so from across an ocean away. It's amazing work.
I hope she gets to do more work with them or with anime in general. So
I would like to see that. I think there's Trigger of any studio, obviously, I think has the most opportunity to tap Western artists, because Western artists know who they are and what they do.
And they do so much they've contributed so much to Western animation as well.
Exactly. And they have an appreciation for it, and it shows up in certain aspects of their style, certain parts of their aesthetic, so that you don't have to be trying to like perfectly mimic whatever the current trend is. They're already setting their own pace and lane, which way more easily brings in a variety and a diversity of artists without it being sort of the explicit, this is a sort of compilation show of sorts. It's not the Gallon Dino Pop Team Epic reason you can have people from various backgrounds. It's because they are already integrating that into a cohesive whole.
Yeah, and on that note, Gallon Dino totally snubbed in these awards. I think at the very least that should have gotten a nomination for best ending as well. But
I'm not sure if best ending. I do like the opening.
I thought it was
like that opening theme. Yeah. That opening theme bangs.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's clearly like, hey, the Pop Team Epic opening theme was super EDM and we're going to do the exact same thing again, but I don't care. It worked. Also, that show's just, the only thing that I feel is missing is I really would have loved to see an AC Gallon Dino segment. Gallon Dino! It's just them lifting.
Kind of amazing they didn't bring them back.
I think it's like they get so much work. That it's like anytime you watch any of those Japanese commercial compilations, they usually have something.
Yeah.
And I have a sneaking suspicion those checks are way better than any of the checks you get in anime.
Japanese commercials, that's where the money is, and I think for a lot of Japanese productions.
Even Kodo Shinkai does those ads because the money's so great. Yeah. So that says everything.
Actually, maybe on that note, because this has gone viral 2 or 3 times now, we should probably talk about the No Frills ad. which I should point out it's not just an ad, it's a broader campaign.
Everything about that campaign, the more I find out about it, it's just like pulling teeth, because you're like, anime themed ad, you're like, that's a lot. Comics themed things, really. And there's a mixtape, and I'm just like, oh, fuck you. Like, no, come on.
Yeah,
because I mean, here's the other thing. That in particular is not only not original, it's all like both Hamburger Helper and Wendy's did the joke better.
So Loblaws finally found a use for all that money it saved by fixing bread prices for all that time.
All that money they stole by fixing bread prices and then only giving people a fucking $30 gift card after fixing the price of bread for a decade straight. So you would think, most people might have like a loaf of bread every couple of weeks. So they should be in it for $300, men.
Karl, if you don't like it, go talk to Pete Bougie. He apparently knows all about it. So,
I don't know. He's going to be busy in the new administration.
So basically, No Frills has put out this ad. It is usually cited in social media as being the No Frills anime ad. But this ad itself is merely an introduction to what they call the Haulerverse. This ad is not, of course, anime. It's actually, in case you were hoping that this was maybe a Canadian ad or were under the impression that it was a Canadian animation production, it is not. It is produced in France by Studio Eddie. 100% France production. I have a few things to say about this ad. First of all, it's definitely, in a way, kind of trying to make poverty seem cool, because No Frills is the discount. They are the discount Loblaws brand.
Yeah. So those who aren't familiar with a couple of things, No Frills is, yes, a discount grocery store chain here, and their parent company, Loblaws, owns a ton of grocery store chains and brands here. One of the brands that they have that's most notable is No Name, which is this very unbranded thing. You may have seen some of their viral stuff also on Twitter.
Yeah.
And basically the whole idea of No Frills is like everything in No Frills is No Name brand. They don't even bother to try and carry the President's Choice, which is their fancier brand, as part of this. That's saying a lot, that you're trying to call the groceries, that you have decided to bifurcate your grocery store brands into two levels, so that you could have them, so that the name brand thing is somehow premium.
You have to maintain the prestige of the
Oreos?
The decadent soda. The decadent flavored soda that
the chocolate cookie soda we had one year. Yeah, that was a sadness, a damn sadness, as David Lynch would say.
I think he'd have a few things to say about that soda beyond that, honestly. But yes. So this ad, it's just actually one part of a campaign that was put together by the John Street ad agency. The ad agency that put it together is Canada based, but the entire cartoon is outsourced to France. I had some credits here, directed by Olivier Lescott, and it's a nice piece of animation for sure.
There's some Saska, no.
Yeah, but it's, once you know that it's French, you can definitely see. Oh yes, this is.
This looks like Pizooka.
Yeah, it's
got big.
It is totally anime vibes. Yeah. Well, the funny thing is, people are like talking about this as an anime ad, and the intention of the campaign is not anime. That's not even what they're trying to emulate. When you go to the website, it's they talk about this whole Haulerverse. They have a bunch of character profiles for all these characters who appear in the ad. It's all very much informed by not only like superhero comics, but like specifically 70s and 80s superhero comics. Superhero comics right from the era when people stopped caring about superhero comics, essentially. Right before.
So what you're saying is we should be lucky this wasn't like Rob Liefeld style?
Yeah. But what I find funny is that I think that in developing this ad, they had no intention of emulating anime. They just wanted to have like an action superhero kind of vibe to it. But the problem is that doesn't really, especially when you send it to France, when you tell them to do action animation, they're going to make it anime, because
that standard's been set since the 1970s.
Yeah. And
like action anime, you mean like Leiji Matsumoto? Like, sure. They have no idea what they're talking about.
Yeah, and also they have like actual comic strips they've made. I've seen those ads pop up on Twitter and Facebook as well, and they are completely done in I'd pin it down as like a mid '80s kind of Marvel Comics style. And also the introduction to Haulerverse commercial that's been running on TV, it opens, the full version opens with kind of a riff on the Marvel Studios production logo at the beginning as well. So like this is not supposed to be anime, but people are clinging to it as anime, which I find that could represent the fact that the media system here in Canada is so starved for actual anime content that people will cling to this. That's my predictable take. There's obviously more to it than that.
I think it went viral outside of that, so people assumed, well, this must be like a Canadian thing that's anime style because they have none of the other context. They don't know about No Frills. They don't really know about no name brand stuff. So they're just like they understand that like the closest thing this looks to, because it clearly is emulating that by virtue of the French animation background, is just like, it looks like anime. It's got anime style pacing. Hey, a Canadian grocery store did an anime thing, fun, and it's like, I don't know. It's just kind of it's a letdown. And as you and I well know, Canadian grocery stores, Loblaws owned grocery stores, mind you, have already been in actual anime. Thanks to Wizard Barristers.
I am currently trying to go on an anime pilgrimage to the Superstore from Wizard Barristers. That was rendered in loving detail. I think it was like episode 6 or something. They go to Superstore.
Can't you walk to that?
I can walk to it because it's right near my house.
I still say they should have character goods there. If they had character goods there, people would be flying out just to go to that damn Superstore.
Yeah, I'd like to know the story behind it. Did they find the picture online? I haven't been able to find that exact picture online. Did like some animator, did Yasuomi Umetsu come to Coquitlam and like take a reference photo there or something?
Well, he couldn't have, because it was the old green livery, and they had already gone to the blue. They'd already gone to the blue and red livery before I even moved up. So
yeah,
like that's got to be an old, like, I mean, is this some sort of like reference library photo thing that you can get? Like, was this like is this a Getty Images thing we're missing out on here?
Yeah.
Anyway. No. Anyways, Canadian grocery stores has already been in a real anime.
Yeah.
So watch Wizard Barristers. It's totally worth it just for that. And it's in no way a mess of a show.
It is a huge mess of a show.
that episode is a mess of a show. Like, yeah. I still love going back to those tweets and remembering like, oh yeah, they thought that they couldn't get Japanese food in Canada.
Yeah.
Where will we get soy sauce in Canada?
Also, I got to point out, like, the last couple episodes of that show are a disaster. Like, at least in the broadcast version.
Is the cleaned up version streaming anywhere?
It's on High Dive.
Oh dear. Well, never mind then, and well, that's all we'll say on that.
Yeah. Just for the No Frills ad. I think I find it funny that it represents a kind of dissonance that people online are pointing out that this is an anime ad, because that's not the intention. I wouldn't be surprised if like Loblaws or the ad agency like didn't even like recognize that that what they wound up here was anime, and it's just funny that people are just projecting that onto it. It's a funny outcome for an ad that really I think is inappropriate for advertising this type of grocery store. But
I mean, it's so funny because their earlier ad campaigns around No Name being this very generic brand were so much more fitting and so much, and still went viral and stuff. It's just like, this just seems like way too much. And they've got other things that would fit. Like, that would be fine for like Superstore, like, which is their big, for anybody in the States, your closest thing, certainly on the West Coast, is going to be, it's like a Fred Meyer's. It's a grocery store, but there's clothes and shit too. So it's also like any Super Target or a larger Walmart. Yeah, like that would have been a better fit, rather than being like, hey, you got to shop at No Frills. Like, don't try and put a coda, don't try and put a sheen on that.
Yeah.
Right now, because there's a lot of people who are shopping at No Frills who used to be able to shop at Superstore.
It's just, we're heading towards a permanent underclass, so you got to have these brands ready for them.
Boy, I can't wait for the really sick Dollarama ads next.
Oh my
maybe
God.
they can, maybe they can, get some folks out of retirement from AKA cartoon. We can have a fun ad like for that.
Have the folks at Peely in Taiwan do a sword puppet ad for Dollarama. That's
Oh my God, dear Lord. And it's like, at least people were pointing out that, like, yeah, Loblaws was good to see in the comments, and to also see people reacting to it in the comments. Oh, these guys aren't cool. Good to know. It's not like it's great to see that some of this mimetic stuff isn't just straight retweet, no critical thinking. So that's a plus.
On that side, I want to see more. I'd like to see more actual anime commercials done for Canada. Like, obviously we had the tourism ad a few years ago, but like I recently saw a Nescafe ad that was done for the Hong Kong market.
They could just run that one here.
Yeah, yeah, they could do that. Stuff like that. Like having anime studios render Canadian cities. That's something I'd love to see. And this No Frills thing is just.
What, you didn't get enough of that out of Super Lovers? For those who aren't aware, that's technically set in Edmonton.
Is it Edmonton? I remember it was Alberta.
I don't think
it was.
I don't think it was
Alberta.
I don't think it was specific enough to tell.
No.
Because they didn't put the effort in that Wizard Barristers did, and that should say a lot about the level of effort put into the
show. We have more Canadian content Canadian representation in anime we're gonna get to in a bit. But first, there's one other thing I just wanted to touch on. It's been a year since we brought it up on this show, and there has been a lot of development, and the development that has happened has been kind of predictable. But I just wanted to touch base on it again. So, as some of you may know, a little over a year ago, the federal government conducted a study to investigate updating the Broadcasting Act. This is, of course, the legislation that designs Canadian radio and television as we know it. It establishes things like Canadian content quotas. It informs the CRTC and the CBC. But notably, it does not regulate online streaming services or anything on the internet in any way. And there was a study that happened a little over a year ago that was looking into updating the Broadcasting Act. And it had some really promising stuff in it, like an ad-free CBC, sort of refocusing the CRTC and rebranding them a little bit. A lot of stuff that I think would be really great, but of course, those things are not priorities. The priorities are regulating streaming services, getting them to pay up. And there's actually legislation before Parliament right now, put forward by our Heritage Minister, Stephen Guilbeault, asking to do just that. But the problem is, no one really actually knows how to do that, much less the Canadian government. And that's what's kind of been represented in the legislation that's come up. And there actually hasn't been a lot of discussion about this, because it has pretty far-reaching implications.
I think that's part of the problem is they have no idea what they're trying to do. So they've built something so vague that it's almost hard to really infer what could happen, because anything could happen from it. It's one of those things where it's like, no matter what we say about it right now, and we're gonna say some things about it. None of it will necessarily come to fruition just because the law is so tabula rasa because they threw their hands up and it's like, oh, the CRTC must be smart enough to know, and no guarantee of that whatsoever.
Pretty much. It is worth pointing out that this type of regulation, it's not unprecedented. There have been multiple laws put forward in the EU so far. Most of it hasn't actually been legislated, but it's mostly just been in the form of treaties and things that haven't actually been put forward. But a lot of the time, a lot of what's been proposed there has arguably been kind of worse, because I won't get into too much detail about this legislation. If you want more information about it, actually, most of the commentary about this has been from Michael Geist. He's the Canada Research Chair in Internet and E-commerce Law at the University of Ottawa. He's he's a major talking head guy on TV a lot when it comes to issues of tech and law. He gained a lot of notoriety back when Canada's copyright laws were being updated a little over a decade ago. I've met him before. He's a really nice guy, and he's written multiple articles about this. He's wrote blog posts. He did a 45-minute podcast on his Law Bites podcast. I think it's the best summary of where this is. There's a couple. I have a couple issues with his stance. I think he has a couple biases mixed in with the way he approaches it, and of course, he knows more than I do. He's a lawyer. I never even took the LSAT. But anyway, it's the best rundown. And if you want to get more information on this, but European countries many of them have been trying to push actual quotas on the internet. Like, you have to have this much European content or this much content from this country on your streaming service. As far as we can tell, that's not happening with the Canadian law. They're trying to push more in the area of having access to algorithms or receiving information about algorithms and user data so that Canadian content can be made more discoverable. And I am going to say, on principle, I agree with that. And that's something that Geist takes issue with.
I think it's because it's so broad. The way it's written is so loose that the information they ask for could be so invasive and detailed. There's no strict explicit saying like you can only have anonymized data to demographics or something like that. It could be, even just asking for the algorithm itself, that's quite a serious industrial kind of secret thing some of these places try to guard. And that doesn't necessarily, that stuff is so now based on machine learning that if they gave it to you, you couldn't get anything fucking useful out of it anyways. And I say that from the working in data science aspect from my side of stuff. Mm-hmm. Having that, if they said like, well, this is how we chose things, and it's just a bunch of like weights in a neural network, that doesn't help you. It's useless. They don't understand how it works necessarily in a real sense of understanding of it. And that's why when they turn the numbers up too high, it hallucinates Nazis into YouTube, right? So that kind of problem, but it's the kind of thing where it's all like, in fact, there isn't an explicit sort of limit to the size of streaming thing that it could be asked for, the detail of this data. Part of it is a vague piece of legislation, and in that means they haven't thought things through, and they're counting on the CRTC to do that, and they can't be necessarily counted on to do that without possibly. There is the open possibility of them infringing in ways that would then you'd have to go back and be like, oh, actually that turned out to be, it's like write your legislation with the Charter of Rights maybe in mind, which includes privacy as an enshrined right. So
now, the way I see it,
you shouldn't have to like assemble 8 things to get context. I think that's a very, very fair critique that they can make this bill a lot more explicit. Yeah. And just avoid a bunch of the questions we're about to talk through.
Yeah, I do agree with that, but I think one problem here is that the whole approach is based on the assumption that these tech companies can't cooperate with governments in order to actually accomplish these things and make sure that they're responsibly working within the cultural industries of any country. And because I don't think it's I do agree, like, on principle, at the sole basis of this, I think it's good to try and rethink all this, because it's very bad to have major American tech companies like essentially controlling the cultural industries in any other country. Like, it's not acceptable. You do have to do something about it.
There's a certain colonialism to the whole thing.
Yeah.
That's it's a lot. That's a lot's coming from Canada, but still technically correct here.
And a lot of the pushback is just assuming that the way these companies work is like, and the information in their user data and their algorithms, that this is all sacrosanct, and that everything that makes them good, everything that makes them desirable to audiences, is tied to the fact that they are separate from governments. They are separate from regulation, and that the regulation itself is going to forcibly rip that apart or forcibly infringe on things these companies are able to do, or, of course, the information that we give to those companies. As well. And obviously, this exposes possibly a fundamental problem. I like to think that there's a better solution to this, and it's not a fundamental problem in that the idea of broadcasting and the idea of content distribution in Canada can be broadened to incorporate that, which I think is the base idea. The big compromise in this bill basically is that the idea that they are almost explicitly broadening the broadcast ecosystem in Canada to incorporate foreign streaming services, and in doing so, they actually remove one of the most important details of the original Broadcasting Act,
right.
Which is the idea that the Canadian broadcasting system shall be effectively owned and controlled by Canadians. It's like the first thing in the actual text of the Broadcasting Act, and that is removed. Now, on that note, I'm very curious to know how many countries actually have a point like that in their own communication legislation. I don't think it is common to do so.
Well, I mean, it does. It's part of how we've ended up with our weird vertically integrated oligopolies.
Yeah. Which, on the other hand, on one side, those vertically integrated oligopolies are protecting us from a lot of the even worse American companies.
American vertically integrated oligopolies that are as bad or worse. But there's a question there with specifically streaming, because they don't tend to necessarily be totally vertically integrated. Netflix buys a lot of content from production companies. So does Amazon, and so does, even if you're getting into these other streaming services that are out there, they're buying, they don't own the studio and produce stuff. They go take a bag of money to somebody and say, go make us a show. It seems like you've got talented people. And a bunch of that, and as has been pointed out in that podcast you mentioned, a lot of that money from Netflix, Netflix is spending a lot of money in Canada.
It
does come with the caveat that then, instead of that being owned by a Canadian, media giant like Bell, it's owned by Netflix, unless it was some sort of, clever little co-production. But either way, Canadian artists ate because it got made. So if part of, it gets into this finer detail of, are we trying to spur the creative industries here, but we don't necessarily care about long-term ownership? We're just here to make sure that people here can work in these fields reliably and regularly, and have that be in that way a bit of a soft power thing, but not so explicitly a soft power thing as, the CBC makes a show and that is then a thing the CBC can sell overseas, but the CBC owned it, a Canadian company owned it and funded it.
And Netflix dumping money into a lot of productions. A lot of people feel that the reason they do that is the threat of regulation rather than
the regulations exist.
Yeah.
How much of this is you need to dangle this as a constant paranoia, but never necessarily actually.
Yeah. Exactly.
It's so hard to say.
I don't think that's sustainable.
No, if it's at some point they call your bluff, unless they're like, shoot, big, or they say like, you don't have to threaten us. Vancouver gets work done, Toronto gets work done, and your dollars are going to be forever favorable because you're a petrocurrency and oil's dead. So, there's that question of, is this necessary? But then also the separate question of what's the possible weird collateral that you get the second you have something as vague as this become law.
Yeah. And that the vagueness, as we've made clear, that is the key problem behind everything. And it doesn't necessarily mean that everything's not going to work out, but having things dangling in the air with that kind of uncertainty is definitely it's definitely worrying. It is worth emphasizing that the reason that so many companies are shifting to streaming is not so much because of consumer demand and competition. It is to evade regulation, because they're trying to get out of that sphere, that heavily regulated sphere that they've been in for decades, and just kind of do what they want and make money on their own terms. And that is a bad thing.
And not just the government regulation of things,
but
also just the other deals that they have struck.
We gotta tie this to anime. Yes. We've been preambling for too long.
We've beat around the bush too much.
All right. So the key question is is there a threat that this legislation could affect anime streaming services in Canada? So I'm pretty confident that the answer is almost definitely no. Again, the legislation we've seen does not give a clear definition on how this is going to happen, but they do express the intent to divide, to sort of draw a line between streaming services that need to be regulated and those that don't. It's very clear they're going after Netflix, Prime Video, Disney Plus,
yep.
Quite possibly only those three.
I mean, do we have any other major top-tier international streaming services? I don't think we even have access to a lot of them.
No. I mean, and there's only so many that could come. But the thing is that it's possible we'll see more. Like, maybe we'll see Peacock, maybe we'll see HBO Max, who knows. But in relation to what we were saying before about all these companies pivoting to streaming services, largely to evade regulation, it's just that everyone kind of has one. NBC has Peacock.
CBS is going to turn CBS All Access into Paramount Plus.
Paramount Plus, yeah, and then
then they also technically have Pluto, but they broke the app up here in Canada, so non-issue.
So, and then of course Warner has HBO Max. These are all services that whatever the Canadian government or the CRTC determines how they draw the line between services that need to meet these recommendations and those that don't. Again, there doesn't seem to be any guarantee that it's going to play out that way. And again, I encourage you listening to the that Law Bites podcast for more information on that. But it is worth noting that
you should cut to the chase. Yeah,
Sony recently acquired Crunchyroll. They now own Crunchyroll and Funimation.
Well, is it done? Or is it underway?
It's done enough. It's happening.
Yeah, it's going to happen, and no one's going to actually complain about it regulation-wise.
Yes. And there's not going to be any antitrust obstacles towards this, and presumably, I think we're going to be looking at probably a year-plus period where these two services are still separate. Presumably, they will merge them together. If Sony isn't stupid, they will brand it as Crunchyroll and not Funimation, because that is the brand people associate with anime streaming almost everywhere in the world.
Globally.
Yeah. So but the thing is that they are looking not only to make this the big anime service. Like, this is Sony's streaming service. This is what they're going all in on. If you're not aware, I mean, obviously they got rid of Crackle Canada a number of years ago, but Crackle in all other regions, including the U.S., has now been sold off. They sold it to the Chicken Soup for the Soul Corporation, which is now also becoming a giant media company as well.
That gets into that whole other weird thing of, it's like, hey, did you know, like, you can stream Hallmark and Lifetime and all this other weird stuff? Yes, all of those things have their own little weird streaming things as well.
Yeah, Chicken Soup for the Soul, they're putting out movies. They're putting out that Nicolas Cage Five Nights at Freddy's knockoff thing that looks fucking awful, but like at the beginning of the trailers, like a Chicken Soup for the Soul production.
I mean, I love that Chicken Soup for the Soul decided, you know what we need? Mandy meets Five Nights at Freddy's. Go.
That movie looks fucking awful. To be sure.
I'm sure it'll be just as good as the Banana Splits reboot.
Mandy showed that a talented director can use crazy Nicolas Cage well. But
which is why I swear to God, like, the lighting in a bunch of the shots in that trailer are totally Mandy ripoff shots.
Yeah. Vancouver-based director on that movie, by the way, for Mandy. Also, if Chicken Soup for the Soul becomes a competitive studio, all the more power to them. They need as much of that as possible in the U.S. right now. But the point is, just like all these companies are having their own streaming service, the conglomerated anime service, that's going to be Sony's service. That's going to be their streaming entity. They got rid of Crackle. That's it. So. Is it possible that
all they will have at the end of this is they'll have Funimation, an anime streaming service, Crunchyroll, an anime streaming service, Wakanim, an anime streaming service, Madman, an anime streaming service. They're not going to keep running 4 sets of servers, kids.
I mean, there'll probably be one English one and one French one in Canada. There'll be Crunchyroll for English and then Wakanim for French is what I expect is going to happen. And they already have Wakanim here right now, and I think it's probably they're just probably gonna add content to it. Take the few French things they have on Crunchyroll and move it around. But again, who knows? We'll see what actually
Maybe they'll
happens.
have a dub and sub service, which seems miserable, but not
I
impossible.
really hope they don't do that. God. But yeah, I mean, that question is, will this result in a service big enough to get the attention of Canadian regulators and have to be regulated? And like, what would the result of that be? Even if that did happen, I wouldn't expect them to.
Genice gets a lot more work. She has to do all the ops nets.
I mean, Sony can handle it. I'm sure they're not. I don't think they'd exit the market over something like that.
No way. It's free money.
Yeah. For sure, and they're probably going to be facing even worse regulation in other countries if that did happen as well. Like, you keep an eye on what's going on in Europe, I think, especially in France right now, because that's going to be the canary in the coal mine for a lot of this streaming regulation stuff right now. But yeah, like I will be if an anime service has to be subject to this regulation, I would be very interested to see how that plays out. I'd like to think that it would result in dubs being done in Canada, but that's probably just not going to happen.
I don't know, because I mean, this gets into a bigger question about just that merger generally, which is what parts are going to survive from each piece, because they've got a lot of duplication on the horizon here, and it's just very much up in the air what practices from Funimation get maintained, what practices from Crunchyroll get maintained, because you don't need two subtitling staffs. Do you keep using the people who are credited and paid decently, or do you use the people who are uncredited and paid poorly? You don't need two marketing staffs. Do you keep the one in very cheap Fort Worth, Dallas, or do you keep the ones who are in very expensive San Francisco? On the other hand, you just built those guys a beautiful set of offices. Might balance things out. There are so many questions up in the air with that then depending on what gets kept, where they decide to do things, how they decide to do things, if they decide like, hey, we're just going to try and do everything we want to just handle the streaming parts of this, and we want everything else to be outsourced and expensive. Hey, that could be a real opening for Canadian dub studios again. It's really hard to say.
Yeah.
Like there is so many that is in motion in the middle of course, an unprecedented time, etc.
But then there's also going to be the question
but certainly the size of whatever that is in the market is so big, it's hard to imagine a cutoff that exempts Crunchyroll as this global, essentially monopolistic player, because High Dive is such a rounding error, and unless Netflix decides to really start like going in, and to be fair, this is an opportunity for Netflix to acquire possibly an entire company's very talented licensing staff.
Yeah.
And it's also an opportunity for the bidding war to suddenly make High Dive viable again. Who knows? All of this stuff, still, it's hard to imagine somehow that they would be below a threshold that would be large enough to catch other low-tier U.S. things, right? Like, am I wrong to think that, like, you can't really cut a niche for Crunchyroll unless you say, like, well, it's a specialty service, and therefore all specialty services don't count, in which case everybody's going to try and say they do genre content? Like, it'll have to be money.
Yeah.
So if it gets big enough, at some point it hits that wall. How do they cope is a good question.
And I mean, Sony may exploit the streaming service just for other content as well, because if it's their only streaming service, then anything even seems even tangentially related, they're probably gonna throw it on there.
Well, I mean, it's the kind of thing where unless there is, I mean, this gets into, are they a long-term thinking company or are they a fast money company? If they're a fast money company, hell, they may keep multiple streaming services because that's possibly 2 subscriptions rather than 1, even if underneath the hood things are still running identically, because there's a lot of, it's a quarterly, you've got X subscribers. If you put them together, you'll mush those numbers together for a bit, and technically you've gone down in subscribers. Who knows how goofy their Hollywood math type things might be here. But if they're being really practical about it, you start doing stuff like what Disney did and what HBO has done, at least in the U.S., which is you gradually claw all these rights back so that you get to be the one streaming it, not any of your competitors, not anybody who's even vaguely adjacent. Which means, hey, maybe at some point Sony wants to run like the Spider-Man cartoons they have on there. It wouldn't be out of place. No one's going to really mind it. In things of that nature, like they've got a media library, they own other animated properties and so on and so forth. They've got animation studios underneath their belt. What is the downside? Certainly, once you've otherwise maybe cycled it through, even if you want to cycle it through a bunch of other places first. Oh, we're going to throw that on Netflix first. We're going to throw that on Amazon first. Eventually, that deals up. Well, do you want it to disappear and be in the vault? No, because then somebody will pirate it. So maybe it turns up.
Yeah, it's I think that the actual inevitable merger of these services, it's a ways off. So it is a little hard to speculate exactly what it's all going to look like at the other end.
Yeah. I mean, who knows how much of they may not even retain all of their library stuff as part of that stuff going forward. They may take a look at a bunch of their licenses that they've been kind of just sitting on because, well, then you would get it. And it's like, well, actually, neither of us really wanted it. And then it will end up on High Dive or Retro Crush anyways. So it's hard to say how much of that stuff is going to happen. Other than that we've seen sort of those kind of things happen as the physical market imploded at the end of the O's. Yeah, there was a bunch of stuff that just never really turned back up anywhere because nobody really wanted to have to get that. That was just part of getting something they cared about. And as those deals imploded and rights reverted to whoever, people just grab the caviar off the top.
We'll see where all that goes, I guess. But yeah,
it's so hard to say.
Yeah. If I don't think that legislation is moving too fast through Parliament right now. I
don't think it's a priority.
And there's gonna be multiple opportunities for public input on that as well. This is why I was originally I was gonna focus this entire episode on this subject. We've spoken about it for quite a while now, but it seems so insignificant when you look at other things going on in the world right now. But, I mean, keep an eye on it. You can always, if you want to give input on this legislation, there's a lot of input to give, of course. Yeah. You can email Stephen Guilbeault. He's the Heritage Minister. There'll be public input opportunities, I'm sure, that are going to point people to different conclusions that the government wants, for sure. But, yeah, something to keep an eye on. Again, it's not being reported on a lot. And I don't think there's a huge threat. Again, not a huge threat to anime overall, but with the way things are constantly shifting around, there's all sorts of possibilities. So,
like I said, I don't think it'll be intentional. They'll just stumble into it, and then they'll be like, "Oh dear, oh bother."
All right. Well, but before we wrap up, Karl, have you been checking out any new anime this season?
I watched the one anime this season that I knew that I'd have to check out, which is X-Arm.
And you're really excited about X-Arm because it finally validates your appreciation of Handshakers and Wiz.
Handshakers is actually still pretty bad. Wise is a lot better. They worked out what they're trying to get at with that aesthetic, and also just realized, just put on lo-fi study beats to chill to, and then do really nice backgrounds of Osaka, and everything else can kind of ride. No, it does make me realize it's there's a huge difference between trying a strange aesthetic that's off-putting, but there's a rule to the whole thing all the way through. And Handshakers and Wise has a very off-putting aesthetic, but I realize it's much in the way something like Problem Solvers does, where it's explicitly following through on what it's trying to do. It knows what it wants to do. It doesn't care if you like it, and in fact,
or if you get a seizure.
Yeah, it's perhaps intentionally dislikable, but there's an underlying system to it. And X-Arm just is a fucking mess.
X-Arm is one of the worst things I have ever seen. My girlfriend commented that it looked like a Teletoon original production from 2006. I think she might be thinking of that Skyland show that was running around that time, which I don't even remember what that looked like.
It's one of those things where it's all it's not even that, like, I get that, like, the guy's more trying to do stuff with motion capture and his live action director, and I see those bits in it.
Who has never worked on an anime before.
Yeah, this is directed by a person who's never worked on an anime, and it shows, because it's like, there's a bunch of things where it's like, even if what your goal is to heavily use a new technology, there's a bunch of other shit you follow through on, even if you're completely green, if you have a sense of animation. And you see that in, like, a work like early CG heavy works like Blue Sub 6. You see that in, you go down to, like, a lot of Gonzo stuff. Like, you can see, like, oh, there are seams here. There are issues they haven't worked out, but they're consistently not straight. There's not, here's a character that we have hand drawn, and here's a person that's being done in, like, cell CG, and here's a person that's it's not this, like, bizarre mess in combination with, like, bad perspective and all these other, there's a bunch of technical problems that are, like, baseline, like, this person's not in the right fucking scale shot to shot, and these lips don't move right, that you can't say, like, well, that was an aesthetic choice, where it's like, when you look at other shows, you're like, ugh, that's off-putting, but then you realize it's like, oh, but it always is, so that was conscious. That wasn't a mistake. They're just trying to get at you. This show gets at you because it doesn't know what the fuck it's doing.
Yeah. The most notable, the thing you'll see noted most in X-Arm, and it is the most noticeable thing, is that significant characters who appear over and over again are modeled in 3D, and characters who only, like, appear once or in a few scenes are drawn in 2D. And they look much better as a result of that. So you know a character is going to be insignificant because they're not in 3D, because they're drawn well, or drawn like competently.
They're drawn competently. I can't say well, because, like, the 2D characters still look like shit. If it's like, and I mean, like, it is bad enough where it's all like, have you seen, like, bad wannabe kind of, like, anime stuff from France from the early O's? It's all like, shit's cleaner, shit's more consistent, shit looks better, like, than X-Arm. X-Arm is just so bad. It's all like, put me in front of the worst of, like, that early wave of anime imitation stuff, and I would be vastly happier as a human being. But that was such a notorious train wreck that, like, I went and made a point to jam down an episode of that real quickly, but, like, with everything being so wild for the past few months, I'm behind on my the closeouts from last year for the fall season, and I haven't really dug too deep yet on new stuff. I've been finishing out, because I've been kind of going at it just, a couple episodes at a time, so I'm almost done with Dear Brother.
Oh, good.
It's so good. It is slow. It is a bad thing to try and watch. Like, I'm going to catch an episode of this before bed. It's all like, it's going to put you out, because even though, like, when you get to the melodramatic scene, it's melodramatic. But until then, it is paced very realistically. There's a lot of, it's been interesting to watch it and realize it's like, oh man, just like all of that, over focusing on trains and stuff that you see at points of Evangelion.
That school bell over and over again. It rips into your soul.
Yeah. But I mean, there's other things. There's, like, a lot of usage of color, and, like, this is set in these locations where I'm like, oh, Ava just wholesale, like, all of the Shinji on the train stuff is so heavily,
and some of
Brother more than anything else.
There's some playground shots too. We're taking quite a bit in Ava for that too.
Yeah, and then of course all of the, I mean, it so sets the template for Utena.
Juri's entire character in Utena is basically a reference to Dear Brother.
Yeah, no, the whole thing is like Utena is all like, this show needs to be as more abstract and more directly gay, which is quite a feat, because the show ain't really like.
There's little plausible deniability.
Yeah. No, it's all like, she has a crush on her brother. No, she doesn't. No, she doesn't. Yeah. Fuck out of here. We know what the real heartbreak of this show is by the end of it. But it's fantastic. It's really good.
X-Arm was, of course, a Crunchyroll original production, and this season, which they will not mention on social media at all.
One last aside on that whole Sony buying Crunchyroll thing is, what is going to happen with all of these Crunchyroll originals? Because some of them, rightfully, we're looking forward to, because they're also co-pros with Toonami. say nothing how that whole relationship's going to work out. But like they have shows that are ostensibly done that they've never shown. High Guardian Spice. They have shows that they should have never shown. X-Arm. And they ostensibly have a production studio or two between LA and Tokyo. What's going to happen with all this? And I don't think anybody knows. That's like I said, nobody even knows if Sony for sure is going to end up with Crunchyroll's technology, because I have heard conflicting reports from people who I truly respect on the matter.
Yeah,
as to whether that's part of the deal.
We mentioned previously that that they were not going to be able to take the technology or any of the platform with them, but apparently that might not be true. So don't listen to us.
Yeah. Well, no, it's not even don't listen to us. It's like I've heard that it can't go with, because from people who work at CNN and thus would have kind of the inside lead, I've heard it's got to go with from people who work at major anime companies. So who knows?
So anyway, that's a Crunchyroll original production. Meanwhile, everything else is on Funimation. Like, everything so worthwhile this season, it's all Funimation stuff. I would say I've been watching some of it. I'd say my favorite show, the show that stood out the most to me, is Other Side Picnic. It's a Yuri sci-fi show. It toys with the basic idea of a parallel world that's explorable that exists sort of in the same space as ours, which is something
kind of dual parallel adventure kind of vibes.
Yeah, classic sci-fi concept, which is not surprising because this is actually adapted from a Soviet sci-fi novel, Roadside Picnic, which is one of the major progenitors of that type of concept in science fiction, and we've seen it in so many things since that novel came out. And what's neat about Other Side Picnic is that because it's adapting a classic sci-fi novel, it's able to take that base concept from the novel, it's able to look at other derivative works that have toyed with that same concept over the years and kind of integrate them in. It mixes in some elements of urban myths or internet rumors, as seem to be more common in Japan, and just sort of integrate them into that base concept. And because they don't have to do the heavy lifting of creating the sci-fi elements of the show, they can just kind of focus on the chemistry between the main characters, or their own conflicts that are obviously very different from what was in that original book. But it just allows all those elements to come together really concisely and compellingly. And it's been a real delight to watch so far. It's actually directed by Takuya Sato, who he directed Kase-san and Morning Glory's OVA. He was also the director of Nia Under 7 and Strawberry Marshmallow as well. Back.
Very interesting background, and Nia being a pretty, it's a sci-fi comedy, but it's a very interesting sci-fi setting for what it is.
Yeah.
I don't think it's not been something that's been cloned a trillion times in anime for once. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff I need to check out. Like I've also heard, I've heard Wonder Egg is supposed to be pretty wild.
Wonder Egg is now there's a show. I didn't study too much. I didn't review the credits or anything too much. I know the screenwriter for that is someone who does not work in anime and takes a much more art house style approach to the storytelling in it. Something that you wouldn't normally see in a television show, let alone an anime very often, or at least not a television anime. And it explores themes like trauma and loss, and things like that in a very unique visual way that combines multiple animation styles in a very haunting and disturbing manner. But it's so gripping and intense. And the director also, he is an anime director, but I think this is his first show, which I found very surprising. I thought after watching that episode, I thought that had been done by someone who would at least have a whole show or a movie or something under their belt, and it wasn't.
Every once in a while, somebody jumps out, into that first tier and comes out swinging, and it's a delight to see, because that's when you start to. Those are the people who change stuff. And it sucks to even put them into this much of a box, but that's your Hideki Annos. That's the person that's like, oh, they've been working on this little stuff, and then they get a chance to bloom.
Yeah. I really can't say much more about it. The words escape me, but that's definitely one of the standouts this season, and I highly recommend it. There's also Back Arrow, which is a mecha show. They're still making those, apparently.
It's so rare, because literally fucking everything's an isekai or fantasy setting, at least right now. Like, we're just filthy with them, and Funimation's no different. It just makes it even harder on other services, because then they really have nothing else left to pick up.
Yeah. It's directed by Goro Taniguchi, who, among many other things, is the Code Geass director. And this show I've only watched one episode so far. Essentially, it's like Goro Taniguchi watched UFO Robo Grandizer and says, this needs more himbo. More himbo. A large amount of the first episode is focused on the dumb, beefy, naked protagonist. Interesting world. There's this one country that's divided in two halves. One side is like ancient China. The other side is like the Wild West. So, you have this wild exaggerations and stereotypes going into it, but done in a very, very satisfying Goro Taniguchi way. But it was fun. I'll check out some more of it. But the one show on Funimation I definitely have to bring attention to on here is Skate the Infinity. So this is a new show, Studio Bones, directed by Hiroko Utsumi. She is, of course, the director of Free, Free seasons 1 and 2, and Banana Fish. And she did not die in the Kyoto animation fire. And also it's written by Ichiro Okochi, who is the screenwriter of Devilman Crybaby, Lupin the Third, Part 5. And he's done a little bit of writing in, basically every major Bones production going back to the beginning of that studio. So what Free was to swimming, to some extent, Skate the Infinity is to skateboarding. Minus pretty much all the sports anime elements, or the legitimate sports anime elements that Free has. But it has the same kind of fun characters and goofy cute boys aesthetic that Free did. So most notably, this is the latest of many shows that has a Canadian, not protagonist, but supporting protagonist. He's the guy, he comes from Canada, he doesn't seem to know what skateboarding is, and he's, constantly complaining about the lack of snow in Japan. They never specify where in Canada he's from. I'm just going to assume it's Alberta, because it's always seems to be Alberta for some reason.
It's such a weird place of Canada to think.
Because
it's like, here's the thing. Culturally, they don't do otherwise give them an Alberta vibe. Yeah.
But
why isn't he making his coffee with bitumen? I'm sorry, Alberta.
But the main character, Reki, he works in a struggling skate shop, and he spends his nights in the exciting scene of underground skateboarding. And he drags this new Canadian transfer student, Langa, into it. And Langa is a failed stereotype of Canadians in every way, except for one key moment when he has to participate in the underground skateboarding. He attaches the skateboard to his feet using duct tape, which shows that he has definitely watched the Red Green show. So that's one thing they got right in this show.
The skaters don't find you handsome, they'll at least find you handy.
Yeah, overall, the show's a lot of fun. I don't know if I'm really going to stick with it. It's Free by being a sports anime. It was somewhat well researched how competitive swimming works, at least.
Yeah.
This show, despite the fact that it has a lot of attention to detail and a lot of good energy behind it, it doesn't feel like they really researched the actual elements of anything that went into this show beyond a few aesthetics. Despite that, it all comes together really, really cohesively. But there's nothing about realistic skater culture and I mean Langa as a Canadian character definitely falls into that. From what I've seen, they really don't have a lot they want to sink their teeth into with him as like a Canadian stereotype. It's like really, really broad stuff. Like he misses snow, he says sorry. That's really about it.
They really have him say sorry in like.
They make jokes about him saying sorry. I think it was like a next episode preview thing. I don't.
Boy.
But
I mean, it'd be really funny if they just really went in and all like, I can't wait to have maple syrup and have a double and just the most.
I'm sure there's been a maple syrup joke. I can't remember.
His favorite animation would be Anne of Green Gables.
Yeah. So we'll see where that goes. I'm sure it will be a pleasant watch for the whole season for sure. Yeah. I'm not expecting anything too interesting in terms of Canadian representation.
Season to be honest, like I haven't seen anything that's like, and maybe it's because so much stuff is on Funimation and people really got into the habit of only having Crunchyroll. But I haven't seen a lot of, this is the one. There's been nothing that's kind of had that kind of magnetic energy of a,
well, there is the latest Attack on Titan season. Right.
Yeah,
now.
but that's 5 seasons in. That's 5 seasons in. Like, there's been no new show where it's all like sparked anything, where it's like, this is the one. Like, I haven't seen anything where people just kind of glom onto it. I mean, partially because like some of the interesting stuff is spin-off or sequel. Like, I haven't gotten to it, but I will watch Cells at Work and Cells at Work Black. Like, those are in there because I like the original shows.
Yeah.
Or like the original show, and I read some of the Black manga, and I'm like, yeah, that's fun. Let's see what life is like in a shitty body. That's fun. But there's been nothing with, like I said, none of those kind of Isaac moments. Nothing even necessarily like, like a BNA where it's like, this is interesting because like nothing on Netflix. It's been quite sparked what A Great Pretender did, or any of you. Just this season, this light season. Like, I don't know.
I mean, I wouldn't say it's a light season. There's plenty to watch.
There's a lot to watch. I just don't think there hasn't been that like, snap wow title. At least in the at least on my feed.
There's one thing you're overlooking, Karl, and it's something that's not on Crunchyroll or Funimation. It is of course Pui Pui Molcar, the stop motion show in which guinea pigs have become cars, and. Yeah, it's adorable.
Who ended up with that?
It's on YouTube. I think it's just uploaded directly by the TV station. In fact, I think some of the episodes are actually region locked. It is a total kid show, but it is really cute and really fun. It well observed guinea pig behavior in it as well. Like they actually paid attention to how guinea pigs act in the way that they show these guinea pig cars. Driving around town, and they like there's always like a special someone who's being taxied around in each episode. It uses some mixed animation styles. It's really good. I found it a little frustrating to actually find the episodes on YouTube, but if you can, it's worth it. There's like 3 or 4 of them so far.
Well, that's clearly the winner of the season.
Yeah. And I have actually, since last season, I have been watching the new Higurashi, and I recently watched all of Higurashi for the first time, or the anime, at least.
The classic one?
The original one. It's really good. I gotta say, I really had the wrong impression of what Higurashi was over the years, because everything that I knew about the series I had absorbed entirely from 4chan memes, and that just gave me the impression that the show didn't have any actual substance and was just mindless violence.
No. I think if I had been introduced to the show that way, I would have come away the same way. Yeah. But the first time I actually watched any of the original Higurashi was at a friend's house. This was long before it was even licensed. Doing a piracy. And it is so... Even the original show, which has clearly zero budget, but is so really goes to show you that like good direction and a good story can just cheat everything, just absolutely everything. That's why like X-Arm has no excuses, because a show like Higurashi with just clearly no money backing it for the first season, but had a good story because it had the story basis from the games, could come through and just slow burn, and it's so hard to get these slow burn arc shows to work. So many shows in the early O's tried to do these things where it was like, to get really one episode's worth of content, you get through 5 episodes, but it was just a stretch. Higurashi does this burn and then ends on those shocking moments, or opens on those shocking moments. It's just like, holy shit. And it's that there's this beautiful, loud, soft pattern to the whole thing.
Yeah.
I haven't gone to the new one, in part because I am so worried that they will have now that they can go off on it, it won't have that tension, and that tension made the whole thing.
So here's the thing about the new Higurashi: it is not a remake, or at least it masquerades as a remake at best. It is a sequel.
Oh boy,
yeah. So like, if you haven't seen Higurashi, I do not recommend starting with the new one, because it's not a new complete adaptation. It doesn't work that way, because it plays with things from the original story too much. And it's going in a completely off the rails direction in its second half. The consensus seems to be no one really knows what to make of what direction it's going in right now, and I am very much among that opinion, or I very much share that opinion. I really don't know where they're going with this.
So in other words, they Evangelion renewaled Higurashi.
Yeah, basically. This is
boy.
Yeah. And
that kind of makes it more interesting to me, because I was worried that was just like going to be it's the problem that Fruits Basket had. As it's gotten into new material and gotten more confident with itself, it's a better show. I definitely don't want to watch something like Higurashi that's like doesn't know what kind of has to find its footing, because part of the only reason probably why that show was notable enough to get a renewal version was that direction.
And like also another thing about the new Higurashi, apparently it integrates elements from Umineko as well. And I tell you, that's not something I'm really interested in going back and exploring. But yeah, there's definitely a strong sense of where they want to go. But I don't know if I like where they're going, or even understand where they're going. I think a lot of people are in the same place with it right now.
It's tough, because it's been interesting to see. I mean, in terms of, was this last year? No, it had to be earlier. No, way earlier. Like, I'm thinking in terms of like Boogie Bop and others, where like that's now like that was trying to follow the books more closely, whereas Phantom was basically its own little side story, and the two have very different aesthetic senses, just because technology's changed in different direction and all that. But like, Boogie Bop and others is a great 18-episode watch. Yeah, fantastic. If you haven't watched it, go back and watch it. But it's like it's such a gamble with any of these shows that are coming back, sometimes 2 decades specifically later. It makes it really tricky to feel ready to jump in on them, especially if there's other stuff to watch.
All right. So Karl, I think we gotta wrap up. Thanks for coming on again. Can you just let people know where they can find you on social media or other places online?
So Karl Arlson, KarlRolson. Just blur all those letters together. On Twitter, Facebook, .com, also ultraclastron.com, for your music needs. I'm doing all sorts of weird singles this year. That Karl Arlson also even works for SoundCloud, where I just grabbed a random beat from one of the producers I followed, where he sampled Mr. Bean and rapped over that. So that was funny. It's quarantine times. I'm just going to act on impulse. Who cares?
All right. Thank you for tuning into Zannen Canada. You can reach me on Twitter @jbetteridge or email zannencanada@gmail.com. The theme song is by Ultraclystron, right here.
Me.
And it can be found on his album Packet Flood, and you can find that at ultraclystron.com. Please subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcast app of choice. Also, I have a Ko-fi account, ko-fi.com/ZannenCanada. I do lose money making this show, so if you do want to throw me a few dollars, if you like what I do, I'm not going to stop you. Anyway, thanks
Rate
for listening.
this show on all those podcast things too.
Yeah, do that too. That's great. That helps. All right. Thanks for listening. See you again.